Welcome to the Education of a Financial Planner, where we look at the major concepts in financial planning through the lens of two quant investors who are learning the ropes of the planning process and how to help clients achieve their long-term goals. Learn along with us as experienced financial planner Matt Ziegler helps us understand the most important financial planning concepts that impact all of us and how we can apply them to achieve the best outcomes in our financial lives. In each episode, we will work through one major financial planning concept from the ground up and learn how we can apply it in the real world. From retirement to college savings to taxes to estate planning, we will cover a wide range of topics that apply to each of our everyday lives. We hope you will join us in our learning journey.
Justin Carbonneau and Jack Forehand are principals at Validity Capital Management. Matt Ziegler is managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Validity Capital or Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Validity Capital or Sunpoint Investments.
All right, guys, today we're going to talk about retirement planning. And what we decided to do for the next few episodes is sort of chunk it out. So we're going to talk about retirement at all the different stages of someone's life. So for this episode, we're going to talk the early years. And then as we go forward with other episodes, we'll get into the max earning years, the early stages of retirement, people that are in retirement, and then post-retirement, and maybe some other things. So this is really relevant to those that are early on in their career. I know, Matt, you've certainly worked with people that are young professionals that are starting to sort of save and think about retirement. It's something that, I think a lot of younger people don't necessarily think a lot about, and that's can be okay, I guess, because, they're more focused on their sort of professional, I guess, career and advancement. But I think the earlier that you can think about retirement, the better, which we'll talk about sort of some of the reasons why. So I guess to start, how do you think younger generations, people that are just starting out, that are earlier in their career, how should they prioritize their retirement relative to other things like student debt, maybe credit card debt that they've got in, or other sort of financial priorities in their life?
The first biggest thing, which is why even think about it when you're 20 years old, and this is a totally abstract concept. So to the 23-year-old who comes in and is like, this is my first job, and it says I have a 401k, and my parents are like, you have to save, but what the heck, like retirement is an abstract piece of art in my brain. It's not an actual piece of my reality. So for them, the biggest thing to know right off the top is that it's easier to compound your money than it is to save your money. And that's probably the overarching rule of this episode we'll keep coming back to. It's hard to get the money, to get the coins from the lemonade stand and get them into the piggy bank. But once it's in the piggy bank, it's a lot easier to keep it there. So first and foremost, if you can get the money into the savings vehicle, that's the hard part. Once it's there, your money working for you, that's a lot easier. Now, how to prioritize, and this I'll call back to, we did the episode on goals-based planning. When we talk prioritization, we're back to those 3 C's. We're back to the calendar, what's going on, sequence of events. We're back to cash flows. Is it a surplus? Is it a deficit? That's looking at what's coming in and what we're spending. Again, how hard it is to actually save the money itself. And then your crap, AKA your BS, AKA your balance sheet, AKA what you own versus what you owe. And so when we talk priority, what we're really talking about is how to prioritize amongst your crap. And when you're 23 and you're paying off student loans and maybe some other debts, that really comes down to a cash flow prioritization problem and where these things end on your calendar. So we may talk about this later, but for kids, first job, prioritizing retirement, figure out a way to save some money, but then also know on your calendar, when am I going to get those student loans paid off? When am I going to pay for that car and all the other stuff that comes up in life?
I think Albert Einstein said that compounding is the eighth wonder of the world. That's how powerful that concept is. And, some of these, well, maybe if I can find the chart, we'll sort of drop it into the podcast here, but there's charts out there that show, if you invest, $50 a month when you're 20, and that compounds over a 40-year period, versus if you start saving $500 a month when you're 40, how much more money you can have when you start saving earlier due to the power of compounding. And so I'll just let you sort of comment on that, Matt, how, important and powerful that concept actually is.
So this idea of saving early is huge. And my one of my colleagues, my colleague Ben Tusky, has this thing where he's like, if you're not going to save money today, like, you're probably going to need to work more later. So if I'm not going to save for another year later, I need to work longer, and vice versa. It's this trade-off. Now, likewise, if I start when I'm 25 years old, it might be, I think it's $300 a month from 25 with some basic market expectations, assumptions mixed in. 25 years old, $300 a month, I got $1 million when I'm 65. Now, if I just wait until I'm 30 and I start that same $300 a month thing, I'm going to end up with something like $700,000 when I'm 65. So a $300,000 delta, or what you're talking about right there, Justin. Now, what's wild is if our 30-year-old wants to hit $1 million but start at 30, they actually have to put in something like $450 a month. And so what's crazy is just a 5-year gap, you've got to increase your savings rate by something like 50% to close that loop. So the power of starting early, the power of Buffett's compounding rule is let compounding work for itself, and even a 5-year head start is a tremendous difference on how much you need the assets to grow.
How often do you see clients actually doing this at 23? If I think back to myself at 23, I was moved in with my parents. I was working for a startup company. I certainly wasn't doing any of the things we're telling people that they should be doing. So how often do you see this in the real world where people have started saving at 23 and been able to be religious with this?
This, much like when we were talking about college savings, comes back to the groundwork that the parents lay. So this is almost more of a thing for parents than it is for the 23-year-old out there. If you're a parent and you have a future 23-year-old who's going to come out into the workforce, beat it into their precious little skulls kindly that they want to save money and start putting money into these plans right away. So usually what happens is when we're talking to that 23-year-old, it's, Mom, Dad, somebody in my family told me I have to do this. Explain to me how I had to do it. Rarely is somebody who's not getting that from other people in their life proactively doing it. The one subset offshoot are the people who their parents screwed up so badly, they're swearing not to screw up themselves, but they are definitely the exception and not the rule.
This kind of plays into an idea I kind of have for my kids, which is I thought it would be cool, once they're in sort of their teens and they're in high school and they're working, this idea of maybe if once they have earned income, setting one of these plans up for them and just putting like a chunk of money in there that you can, whatever you're allowed to contribute, and just let it sit there forever. That's a lot of people give gifts to their kids in different ways, but that's a really cool way to give your kids a gift that will pay off a lot in the future.
I love and am a huge fan of the idea that once a kid, child, whatever, has some form of earned income, do the Roth IRA. It's easy. Earned income can go into the Roth. Sometimes parents will match what the kids put in. They'll say, hey, if you've got $3,000 from the paper route, put it into the Roth. I'll give you $3,000 in savings or help pay for whatever over the course of the year. But it starts that habit. And most importantly to you as the parent who clearly cares, you started that compounding early.
One of the things that I've seen just in the last 6 months is two examples. One, a 28-year-old whose grandparents passed away. It's a family-owned business. As a result of that, there was a liquidity event, and distributions went to the grandchildren and the children. So that young girl was thoughtful enough to say, hey, I want to invest this. And then another example of a great aunt of someone that I know passed away, and they chose to invest the money. So, those are just two examples that I'm seeing. It's like there almost is like some catalyst almost needed to happen in order to launch them into like sort of a savings type thing, but it gets them on the right track.
Sub to that, there's generically for younger people, there are rules. There's plenty of rules of thumb. Save 20% to a third of your income for yourself for retirement and other things. But next to that too is this idea of how much do I need to save, and not to turn this into one of those fun commercials with arrows on the ground directing you to how much you need. But there's generically this idea that you're going to need 70 to 80% of your income in retirement. And so you'll need assets to support that. And then there's the wacky part, which is the other side, and what made me think of this from what you just said. there's also this thing called the retirement puzzle, which is why do people of assets never seem to spend them all? And it's something like we say 70 to 80% of income, but in reality, it ends up being closer to like 50 to 60%. So starting young, trying to save for that 70 to 80% of lifestyle to make sure you have assets that can support that go inside. That's how you get your margin of safety. And then, maybe pass on a triggering event to somebody else in your life.
We wanted to talk about this idea of human capital versus investment capital. So when people are young, obviously they have many more years to earn money. So human capital is very important. And I was I remember this story from, I think it was '09 when Buffett was at Columbia Business School, and he was talking to a bunch of business school students, and he said, I'd happily, give you $100,000 today to buy 10% of your earning income over time, basically effectively valuing their earnings at $1 million. Obviously, some of those students would go on to earn a lot more. Maybe some would earn less, and then he sort of followed that up with like, if you can learn to effectively communicate, then that ups your earnings power like 50%. So he would be willing to pay $150,000 for those that were really, really good communicators. Because actually Buffett, when he was young, was very, very scared of public speaking, and then he actually ended up learning how to become a much better public speaker. But I thought this idea of human capital versus investment capital over time and how that changes, that's just sort of an interesting thing to think about, I think.
So we like to talk about, especially with, and not just the 23-year-old client, but the 23-year-old client all the way up through the still ambitious 50-something-year-old client, and sometimes beyond, is it's never enough to just talk about return on investments. It's always important to also talk about the return on yourself. So ROI versus ROS, or whatever way you want to think about it. And to Buffett's point, and actually back to the point of it's harder to save, it's easier to compound. If you can get a job, then you can get a raise. And the human capital portion is always figuring out, how do I level up my income, my resources, my ability to save in the position that I'm in? Whole separate set of strategies, not something everybody is skilled or trained to talk about, but it is something where you want to think about, because when you're 23, getting a $10,000 raise is probably a lot easier than the money, the nest egg that you haven't cobbled together, growing at that rate. So the human capital portion, especially as we're trying to maximize savings, which I keep saying for a reason, that's the hard part. How to maximize your savings so that then your money can go work for you is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and to your point, if you're going to make any kind of decisions or do any kind of things when you're 23 years old that's going to impact the rest of your life, they're going to probably be on your career side. I mean, certainly everybody should be saving for retirement if you can, but the big movements in the needle are going to occur with things you're doing with your human capital when you're that early, because it's worth so much more than your investment portfolio at that point.
And don't forget what we said in the education episode too. Just no college degree to college degree. On paper, generically, Bureau of Labor Statistics basically says that's worth an extra $25,000 a year in income. You want to get a professional degree, go out, get your MBA, get your master's, do something else. We're talking about another like $60,000 a year over no degree per year. So anything that improves your ability to save is going to default also improve your ability to compound.
I want to touch briefly on investing. I mean, we're not going to give any investment advice here, but that is a question a lot of people ask when they're saving very early in their career is, what do I invest it in? I mean, off the top of my head, I would think probably like some sort of index fund portfolio, probably with little or no exposure to bonds, probably would be appropriate that earlier in your career. But I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
So when we're looking to compound, rule number one is just probably find stuff that's not going to zero. Now, we're not talking about starting our own business. We're not talking about highly entrepreneurial things. We're also not talking about betting the nest egg on, the latest meme stock or grift of your choosing. But generically speaking, whether you're all in stock, all in bonds, or somewhere in between, point number one is pick stuff that's not going to go to zero to compound, because you can't compound zero. But I can compound, as an old broker used to tell me all the time, when people would get scared about markets. And I remember this in like 2008 and 9, and he'd be like, yeah, this is a problem when the Dow goes to zero. The reason index funds are so great is because a smattering of the largest companies in the country or in the world probably aren't going to zero if you own a bunch of them in a basket. And that's why you do it, because you can compound if you got a basket. Beyond that, it's all about what works for you. And this is where everybody's going to be a little bit different. If you can stomach the volatility, it doesn't bother you, or you get excited by it, high growth stocks can be a great way to achieve those compounding results that you're after. But likewise, if you're not, if that's not you, talk to someone and figure out what's the best thing that you can stick to that you can feel comfortable owning. And that's critical. Know yourself first, then figure out the best way to get what you want to get out of this.
Yeah, you probably just touched on the biggest lesson I've learned in my career, which is a person's ability to stick with a strategy is number one. You can put a strategy that has 5% a year better returns in front of somebody. If they can't stick with it, they're going to underperform. You have to be able to, whatever that volatility is, you have to be able to withstand it in order to make the strategy work for you.
Joel Greenblatt, in that example, that is probably near and dear to all of our hearts here, of the all broccoli store. Like if you hate vegetables and you got to go on a diet, and broccoli is your least favorite thing in the world, but you got to have something like, if I give you the all broccoli diet and you hate broccoli, it's going to fail every day of the week. It doesn't mean I can give you the all chocolate cake diet, but the reality is, like, we got to pick something you can stick to if we're going to get the benefits of this track we're on.
Can you talk a little bit about the vehicles that are available for people for saving early in their career for retirement? I know it depends, obviously, if you have an employer-sponsored plan or if you don't, but can you just talk in general about what's available?
So we want to think in terms of pre-tax and post-tax. And the importance of making that distinction, and we'll give some examples of each, is you have pre-tax vehicles, which are basically, I earn the income, and then before I pay taxes, and in some cases other things too, that money comes out. And it goes into some savings vehicle, and then that savings vehicle can grow, so that later down the road, when I take it out, then I pay tax. No tax at the beginning, pay taxes later. That's different from post-tax, which is I earn the money, it comes in, I pay taxes now, but now when I touch it later, all of a sudden, tax-free. So 401ks, traditional IRAs, SEPs, and other things, they tend to fall into this pre-tax bucket. So that's money that's deductible, gets invested, and I'm going to pay taxes later in life. And then post-tax would be like your Roth IRAs, where you go, okay, I'm going to pay the tax now, but later when I take it out, I get all the benefits of the growth and it can come out tax-free. Highest level, those are your basic vehicles.
And you touched on the next question I wanted to ask, which is this whole debate of Roth versus traditional IRAs, 401ks, whatever it is. I mean, that's way more than we're going to be able to get into here, but I'm just wondering, for someone who's 23 years old, who's starting in their career, how do they think through that and which one they should be contributing to?
So this is very much a tax now versus tax later question. The generic rules of thumb, just to be aware of, is if I'm choosing pre-tax versus post-tax, I'm choosing pay tax now, pay tax later. And the general rule of thumb basically says, if my tax rate now is higher than I expect it to be later, then I want the tax deduction today, and I'll pay the income tax later when I take it out. If my tax rate is lower today than I expect it to be later, then maybe I want to pay taxes today and not have to pay them later when my rate is higher. There's math and spreadsheets to vet this. Talk to somebody if you want to model it out, but that's the generic rule. Now for the 23-year-old specifically, they're going to want to talk with somebody, back to the cash flow, our middle C, and look at what's the tax drag and what's the ramifications of this. Because lesser earning, depending where you are in those tax brackets, could determine, hey, that 401k pre-tax deduction, that might actually be worth a lot in net savings to that person. And likewise as the income scales go up. So both are good and viable options. You just have to understand them in context for what's best for you.
I mean, is it fair to say that early in your career, where you're probably not making as much money as you will later on, that people tend to lean toward Roths?
I think it's safe to say that that's a fair starting assumption, but it's a starting assumption you definitely want to test. Because again, there's the scenario if I'm unmarried and I'm 25 and maybe I'm earning six figures, we would still want to look at, even if your upward career trajectory is you're going to earn a heck of a lot more over the next 20, 30 years, there's a question of what's the tax break work on the deduction you're going to get for putting that pre-tax money away.
Is there anything that people who have employer-sponsored plans, is there anything specific we want to talk about around that? Like, for instance, there's always this rule people say that, contribute at least up to the match, no matter what you do. Is there anything about or along those lines we should talk about?
So we should say if you have a match or profit sharing or anything that your employer is giving you, especially on a pre-tax basis, that free money is free money. And as a general rule of thumb, you should take free money when people want to give you free money in legal ways, like 401k matches. Within that, the other thing too is, like, should I contribute to my 401k or should I do an IRA? Well, generically speaking, the 2023 limits are something like, I think it's $6,500 for your deductible IRA contribution or your Roth contribution, but you can get up to $22,500 in 2023 that you can deduct yourself for your traditional. So employer plans, distinct advantages in how much you can put away, and if they're giving you free money, you want to take it. Another quick and easy for the 23-year-old to think about is, let's say I get a 3% match. Well, even if all I put in is my 3% of salary to get my 3% employer match, I've immediately doubled my money. That's better than any market return for that one calendar year as you're likely going to get. So take the free money if they want to give it to you.
So one of the things that I just want to sort of say here is, and this is kind of amazing, that during COVID and, about a year or two after, you had all these young investors coming into the stock market. And I always viewed this as like there's a positive and a negative. So the positive was they were investing, getting exposure to stocks and investing. Now, at the beginning, they only saw an up market. And then obviously with what happened last year, a lot of people got completely obliterated, especially if they're in those high growth stocks. But I was just thinking, and I don't think, and this is new to Robinhood. So Robinhood just recently announced an IRA. Like, for all that time, they didn't have an IRA. So you had millions and millions of new investors who could have been investing in a retirement account, getting started, but instead they were buying individual stocks, and now retail engagement is way down. So it's sort of, I don't know, it's a sad sort of lesson, but I guess trying to look at the plus side of it, I think learning those hard lessons in the market early on, hopefully for a lot of those investors, will be a good thing.
Back to it's harder to save money than compound money. The best time to learn a devastating lesson, or as the Jesse Livermore quote that I use relentlessly, is cost of tuition. When you screw up and you lose money, it's cost of tuition. So what did you learn from your education? So for those young investors who got hosed either because Robinhood didn't have an IRA option, or they made disastrous choices in their investments, or the market just went against them and they made a good choice and they're going to stick through it, that cost of tuition earlier in your investment experience is huge, so long as you learn from it. Likewise, on that point of like Robinhood not having these vehicles available, this is also why, even when you're young, find somebody who is willing to or capable to help you. I heard a stat the other day from the Money with Katie podcast where she talked about people making contributions to their Roth. So young people making Roth contributions, but then never investing the money. It's just sitting in cash. And again, you went through the hard act of saving it and putting it away. Get it compounding, because that time horizon is everything.
Are there any resources that you can think of, Matt, where people can go? I mean, you can go to the standard brokerage site, Schwab, Fidelity, and there's tons of educational content there. And they've kind of, geared their content to and educate around. They know that some of their audience is younger investors that are just beginning. But is there any other sites that you can think of that are good resources for beginner savers, investors?
There's lots of great resources for the catch-all stuff, and that's where like Schwab, Pershing, Fidelity, NerdWallet. Check out those for your basic Investopedia, your basic like how-to stuff, or like what is a Roth, what are these things. But then the thing I can't stress enough is go online and look for people who are talking about the topics you're interested in. Probably not like something that feels shady on TikTok, but go to LinkedIn, go to Twitter, go to other places, listen to stuff on YouTube from people talking. And if it resonates with you and sounds like your situation, reach out. There's a lot of good qualified professionals Look for people who have CFPs and CFAs and good designations after their name too, but find people who are then translating this stuff into a language you understand and can help you figure it out. And that's true if you're 20 years old or if you're 60 years old. Like, find the personality who's going to help you navigate this, because there is a lot of information. There are a lot of details. And good help it's hard to find. It's not impossible to find, and it's easier to find than ever with the internet.
So we've talked about the importance of compounding, starting early, how human capital is almost more important than investment capital early on in one's career. Finding a strategy that you can stick with. Matt, to your point, I mean, for the beginning investor that just needs to get their money invested, I mean, index funds are great. They're low cost. They're diversified. We talked about the various pre and post-tax vehicles. Again, that's something someone should investigate based on their tax situation and, run the numbers, like you said, put it in a model to see what type of advantages you might get both now and in the future. And then we kind of, just talked about, I guess, the cost of tuition, like learning early in investing is better. So you can try to hopefully avoid those mistakes in the future. And then what we'll try to do is put a link to some of those resources that Matt talked about in the show notes. But as we mentioned, this is the first of many retirement planning episodes we plan to do. If anyone has specific questions or comments, please get in touch with us, because we want this to be a listener generated, receptive type podcast where we're taking topics from the audience that they want to learn about. So thank you guys very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Hi guys, this is Justin again. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. You can follow Jack on Twitter at @PracticalQuant. You can follow me on Twitter at @JJCarbonneau, and follow Matt on Twitter at @CultishCreative. If you found this discussion interesting and valuable, please subscribe in either iTunes or on YouTube, or leave a review or a comment. Also, if you have any ideas for topics you'd like us to cover in the future, please email us at excessreturnspod@gmail.com. We would like this to be a listener-driven podcast and would appreciate any suggestions. Thank you.